Hi, I'm Susu and I'm joined with Professor Harmon. If you'd just like to introduce yourself and what you do as your role as Vice President of Students.
Sure. Thank you. Hi, I'm Colm Harmon. I'm Vice Principal Students, and I'm also a Professor of Economics. And my role, in effect, covers student issues from prospective students thinking of joining the university through to when our students become alumni and everything that happens along that journey.
Thank you. And I was just wondering, I'm sure you know about the housing crisis. I was just wondering what your opinions on it and thoughts, and how have you seen it affect students coming into Edinburgh?
Well, the housing issue for us has been it's interesting. From our point of view, we start the planning conversations around housing very early, and all of the issues around our accommodation availability are intrinsically linked to our conversations around recruitment of students. So we set out always to make sure that we have a student recruitment that's in line with our availability and space. And certainly I think this year, for students who are in what we usually call our guarantee, first year students, international students, we were able to meet that and meet it comfortably enough so that we were able to provide a couple of thousand places above that. But that is, I guess, touching at the issue of Edinburgh in general being, high demand city, a capital, a place with lots of other industries, and in a sense, part of what makes Edinburgh attractive to be a student in makes it attractive for many other people to be in. And I think there is a reality that as a city that's in high demand, the student body is going to be increasingly competing with that demand. And I think so I feel pretty comfortable that for the students that we've always traditionally supported, we do a very careful piece of work to make sure that we can happily meet that. And we don't have the problems that we saw other universities having to sort of send students away to other towns and bus them in every day. We haven't had that, and we'll commit to never having that problem. And we've been able to do as much as we could above that. And I think in particular with this year, we've also had, some immediate crisis issues that our team have been able to deal with. But I think there's a much bigger question coming to us around life in Edinburgh and what student life looks like, and how do we have that conversation with the student body, not necessarily about the guaranteed places group, who I think we can take care of, but the wider student body and how that's going to impact on them.
Yeah. Thank you. So you believe that ensuring students a place to live during their studies is a priority for the university and something that they should be doing?
So it's impossible for us to provide a place for every student. What isn't impossible for us to do is, as a university in partnership with the student associations and with student bodies more broadly, is to continue to have the conversation with the city council, with all the other housing and other agencies around making sure that the student needs are part of the planning process for the city as a whole. For Scotland as I said, I'm a professor of economics, and if this was in many other countries, the education sector is treated like an export, because people come here, they buy things, they live here, they rent houses, they do all those sorts of things. And for a country like Scotland, education is as big a sector as finance and banking. So this is an incredibly important for the Scottish economy. It's incredibly important for the Edinburgh economy, and we need to make sure that we continue to ensure that the voice of the university and of students are clear in that debate. We want to provide more accommodation. We've opened new accommodation, particularly for postgraduate students, for example, and help different styles of accommodation. We want to have more price points, but for example, we've had planning permissions turned down repeatedly. So we are making every effort. We could never provide accommodation for every student, but we can continue to lobby and do lobby continuously for the voice of students to be heard in those debates. But that's a tough gig for us.
Thank you. 2 seconds. Sorry. So you must have a duty of care for your students. I was just wondering, you touched on earlier, it was mainly for the guaranteed students. Is there any maybe policy going forward or any implementation for maybe non-guaranteed students as well for that duty of care and responsibility, just so it can have a wider audience as well?
I mean, the accommodation strategy more broadly, does need revising, and I think there's several dimensions to that. There's one is the guarantee, and as I said, I'm comfortable we're in a good place on the guarantee. I think the second is continuously ensuring that we have more capacity beyond that, and recognizing that for increasing numbers of students, the traditional model of being in halls for the first year and then never seeing them again may change, and they may see our halls as desirable. In many ways, our halls are more secure. They're cheaper than the private market, for example. So we want to make sure that we can, to use that language, maximize what our estate can provide in student accommodation. I think on the duty of care point, I think we have an absolute responsibility to sort of be honest about the challenges of Edinburgh, and I think perhaps the sort of idealized vision we have of being in Edinburgh, walking across the meadows and living in Marchmont and all those kind of things, that's probably a reality that we're going to have to confront as changing. That students will be perhaps commuting more or be in suburbs a little bit further out, and that will have impact on how we plan our teaching schedules, how we plan our timetables, and those kind of questions. So that's another dimension. And then I think finally is to make sure that we're more equipped. And again, I would argue that our team were and did everything possible to find accommodation and make sure that we had had some ability to quickly provide a bed quickly and provide transition to more permanent accommodation wherever possible. So again, I think a dimension that we're going to have to think about doing more in is in that crisis management piece, that when students are faced with a shock like this, we can deal with it. The reality of the last couple of years on housing has been that it's that immediate period of the start of semester that creates this big crunch. It's just coming off the festival. It's in that transition in terms of accommodation that was previously available becoming available again. And again, I think that the particularly our experience tells us it's that sort of September, October period that accommodation can be found, but it may not be available bang at that moment. And again, I think that's the sort of thing that we have to do more of, that short-term transitional arrangements to make sure that students have somewhere to be and start and be safe and warm and fed, but then they can continue to search for the place they need and transition over time to that.
Many students have been sofa surfing throughout the first few months of the semester. I was just wondering, could you really say that you're improving the student experience if many of them are still homeless and have been left homeless throughout the start of the semester?
Well, no, I mean, I don't want that. I don't see students couch surfing. It's not good for them, and it's not good for their studies. It's not good for their health and well-being. I think what I'm particularly keen to know is just what is the extent of that problem. To the sort of questions that we've been thinking about, that you've asked, and we've been thinking about, evidence is going to be really critical. So that the university's offering and structures and space and teaching and timetable is optimized to help wherever we can. That seems to be the task we have in front of us over the next several years. We may be in part dealing with some additional kind of bulges coming through. We know that we had, for various reasons, to recruit more students for a couple of years, and that has gone away. The university is not going to be growing, over the next few years. So we have a sense of what our norm is now, and that's the planning kind of structure that we have to work to. But is it a good student experience? No, it obviously isn't. how much of it we can, to be perfectly honest, how much we can as an institution control and deliver on is tricky, because as I said, we can't provide the accommodation at will. But I think with everything settling down, and with the sense of what a normal year looks like in terms of student recruitment and structures, and with the changing environment around housing in the city, it's the right time to sort of try and sit down and figure out what the Edinburgh experience will look like, and it may require a different perspective on that. It may be that it isn't the same experience as generations of students have gone before have had, but so what are we doing to sort of counterweight that? How can we make other aspects of being here better? So I think that debate is really important, but it is one where, to the basic question, do I consider it a good student experience? No. Our ability to rapidly change that situation is very limited, and that's being honest about it.
I was wondering, what is the current housing policy for Edinburgh students?
So the current housing policy for Edinburgh students is largely centred on that guaranteed cohort, and that I think is a really interesting question about whether and how we go beyond that concept. So, I think we should be glad and proud, and I certainly am proud of the team involved in both meeting the guarantee and having a very, very good instinct for what the market looks like. So we know all the providers, we know all the landlords, the big letting agencies and so on. We talk to them, they talk to us. So I think we have a great team who work the market very well. I think that the questions for me around is beyond that guarantee, what more we can do? And I keep coming back to several things. One is keeping up the pressure on the city council and others to help us. If we could build the sites, we would be building. We should be well on the way to having several hundred more places in Peffermill near our sports centre down at Cameron Toll. And instead, there isn't a shovel turned in the ground because it's been turned down for planning permission several times. So that's one big task, and a really critical one in that thinking about an accommodation strategy into the future. I think the other relates to the sort of this is speaking more personally than what I think of as part of the policy. But if you visit cities, think of somewhere like Boston, which has a whole bunch of big universities. What you don't get in Boston, say, is the mass exodus from the city at the end of April, and then everybody coming back looking to get somewhere new. So people tend to move to the city. They may be in halls of residence in a university for the first year, like our students. And then they move into their sort of permanent residence for the next few years. And I wonder if we're moving towards that being a more normal phenomenon, that students won't be sort of as transient over that summer period. And again, that creates really interesting questions about what are you going to do in that period. Is there ways of us having more study going on in that period that can help you? Is there a way of ensuring that the labour market can absorb students who may want to work during the summer here rather than having to go away? So I don't have an easy answer. I think the strategy, so to speak, is centred on the guarantee and then maxing the available space we have above that. But that's heavily constrained. I think the conversation is one of, we want to do more. We need to make sure that we can get the permissions to do more. And I think we have to have a conversation as a university with the student body about what life in Edinburgh could look like, and whether or not we have to change a little bit about how we behave and how you behave in order to solve the longer term problem. The question really is Edinburgh changing fundamentally in some way, that it's moving away from being a kind of a student city in the sense of that was one of its primary markets in terms of rent and so on, to being a city with global attraction. And once that happens, then lots of things change in the process, and we'll have to be thinking about those changes.
You touched briefly on private letting agencies and private accommodation just there. I just wanted to let you know, private letting agencies now are expecting a lot more students to keep their current flats and housing. And I was just wondering, what support are you hoping to give out to either students returning from their year abroad or students moving out of halls or moving flats? What support are you going to be giving them that haven't got a flat confirmed for their next years of studies? What's going to be, what's in place for them?
So what's in place right now, I think, is relatively little. And to be honest, I think what we need to know is if the phenomena is, if we're seeing that shift, if we're seeing different needs from students, what we're going to need is to have that articulated to us so we can start to make plans around it. So I think there are, as I often say, there's, we're open to have conversations on anything that will help. I think we try and be as reactive and responsive as we can be. We'd like to be more proactive and start to get ahead of some of the problems, which I think relates to some of the wider planning discussions. But in terms of if students have needs, I'm keen that they bring them to us and start so that we can start to say, well, there's a thing we didn't have to do before, right? Do we have to sort of start shaping that? And that's been the story very much of the last 2, 3, 4 years in general. There's so many things that we never thought we'd have to think about that we now have to think about. We've changed our kind of mental health and well-being support structure, for example, to react to a completely changed landscape around that issue. I think the issues around student housing are probably not the next cab off the block, really. And for me, the sort of things you're asking, we don't have clear plans on right now but could we have? Yes. And I think what the message from me would be, tell us the sort of things that you think is going to be useful. It may be, for example, that students would find, a storage facility very helpful. That they're going to be out of the city for a period. They need to find somewhere to keep their stuff. They don't want to go through the hassle of moving things. They're the sorts of things that, thinking kind of laterally, that we once we know there's a demand for it, we can start to think about whether we can put together structures to deal with it.
Thank you. We spoke with a member of USA, and they told us that you were, the senior leadership team, had a strategy in place, or a strategy plan for students coming next year. I was wondering what implementations are actually going to be in that plan, if you can disclose them.
So there may be some confusion. There's an accommodation strategy which was due to be refreshed during and then the pandemic hit, so that got paused, and that strategy was already addressing things like expansion of our accommodation estate. I mentioned, as I said, Peffermill and various other things that we had at planning stages then. What we now are committed to doing is starting to reshape that accommodation strategy and take it through the kind of relevant university governance channels. So that's a piece of work that's kicking off. It's not refreshing something for the middle of this academic year. We're going to have to continue to work with this year, as we've already set it out. But a revised accommodation strategy is something that we are committed to, and the University Court, which is the governing body of the university, requires that strategy. So it is a piece of work we'd have to do, and in doing that, that will draw in USA reps. USA are represented, of course, on court, and we'll draw in the kind of the views of the student body as best we can. So not so much a kind of a mid-year refresh, or it's not about having something for January, for example. It's about rethinking the accommodation strategy, which covers a 5-year period, and it's probably a good place where some of the changing demands and changing nature of student residential patterns are going to be important for us to kind of flesh out.
The University of York is implementing for their students about a £150 grant to give to students for household energy bills. I was wondering, is that something that Edinburgh, do you think, should be doing, or is there anything similar that you guys are thinking of implementing?
the York initiative is very interesting. I mean, it's interesting for me, and again, remember, as VP students, but also an economics professor, that to me means, is that £150 well spent, or is it better that £300 or £400 or £500 is made available to students who are in particular needs, not just on energy bills and other things. So, with respect to my colleagues at York in making that choice, it's one way of dealing with the issue. It's sort of a universal sort of approach. It's a bit like, I get £66 in my bank now from a rebate from the gas company, because everybody in the country is now getting that £66. And there's a question about whether I need it versus somebody else. Could somebody else do it more than that £66? Almost certainly. So I guess the question really is one between how we approach these kind of payments and things. And so the York approach is one. It's a kind of a universal payment. We instead we've doubled our what are unhelpfully called hardship funds. I think that's something I don't like, and I know people in the student team really dislike. But for sake of shorthand, let's call them that. We've doubled the hardship funds this year, adding £1.5 million to the fund. We're prepared to do more in that space, and as a result of which, we can deal with much more. We can deal with energy problems and problems paying bills to the tune of £150, but actually we can make payments of £500 if we need to, and make them quickly to deal with emergency issues, which may be more broad than just energy. So I would argue that our approach is to sort of make sure that adequate funds are available. We've worked with USA and others to try and make the process for accessing those funds as easy as possible. And that's the way we've done it. And we probably will spend, the same amount of money as York will spend. They've smaller student body than we do, but we've just in a sense chosen to do it differently, I would argue.
We're aware that the University of Edinburgh has a number of hotels around the city, and I was wondering, why weren't these hotels potentially open up to students that were struggling to find housing in the first few months of the semester?
So the university does have a hotel campus. We have 3, and the option to use the hotels was examined. There are a couple of problems. One is sometimes the hotels had already been contracted to other users, and we were prepared to have a conversation with potential clients to say, could they change their plans, or could we use it for difference? The main issue is that a hotel is not licensed to house students on a somewhat semi-permanent basis, even in a transient way. It's one of they have to be redesignated as HMO facilities rather than hotels. So the license that we operate the hotels under is a hotel license. The license that we would have had to operate under to have students in the hotels would have been a different one. And that's fundamentally the challenge we had at the time. We certainly looked at the option, and I'm not so sure, you'd have to check with my colleagues in ACE, whether in accommodation, catering and events, whether or not the hotels were used at all. But certainly the option to try and use them was examined. And essentially by the time we would have gone through the approval process to change their status in terms of usage, we'd have been quicker dealing with the problems the way we did, and that's at its core the reason why the hotels weren't immediately used. I have about 5 minutes or so.
5 minutes, yeah. Of course, I'll just pick just a few more questions that I think are most important. 2 moments, please. Okay. How are you thinking of spreading the word and communicating the new initiatives that you and the student leadership team will be taking? How do you think is the best way to get that out, get that message out? As a lot of students, I think, have felt quite a distance from you and them. There hasn't been much communication. So with these new initiatives and plan to help them secure housing, how are you going to rectify that gap between them?
Well, thanks. That's a really important question for me. I'm sorry to answer a question with a question, which is always a way of politicians deflecting things. But I guess it's really interesting for me to hear, and that you feel, and you feel students feel, that you don't hear enough from me. I mean, I certainly am more than happy to be communicating more broadly, and certainly at times over the last 2 or 3 years that I've been here, we've pushed communications out from my office, or from me personally, more than we might have done in the past. I think that the balancing act for me always is between is a sense of when are we saying communicating too much or too little, and how is the message reaching, and secondly, making sure, particularly around lots of issues that are current, for example, to look at the example of around housing. If students couldn't arrive, for example, by the time, or didn't have housing, what were the options? Those options have to be managed at the level of a school. So my communicating on some of those things runs the risk of confusing matters, frankly, when I don't have the sort of jurisdiction to say, it's okay to arrive late if you're a philosophy student, but it's not okay to arrive late if you're a physics student. I don't have that sense of what's acceptable and what's not. So it's important, and it was certainly the feedback to me was, let the schools do that communication. So a great question, one that I feel, I think in the last couple of months, for example, when cost of living crisis hit, we had a video with Nii from USA and Lucy Evans, our deputy secretary, created. We're thinking of similar communications around things like the return to exams and all the experiences that are shifting. There is a kind of a stronger commitment, I think, to communicating directly with students, and I'd like more of that to be from me and in my voice. I feel it's a fair accusation that students haven't heard enough from me, and I guess the sort of my kind of line of defence, so to speak, is that they've heard a lot from their schools, and it's about, at the moment it felt like there was a more appropriate to let the schools communicate the immediate issues around transitioning back to university life. As we move forward, we're back into a phase of things that are kind of more in my direct control. So as you said, opening up a wider consultation around accommodation strategy will be the sort of things that we'd expect to communicate soon. Any change, I think the cost of living and the available hardship funds, for example, are being accessed, but I'm worried that the process is not clear enough, and that there isn't a clear understanding with students that this money is there. There's a team within the university that deal with it and can get money to you very quickly if there's a crisis. So I think we've moved over the last year, as we move through the semester, we've moved away from those kind of transition things which schools are better handling, and we're moving back into sort of more central messages, which are probably better coming from me. But I do think you're right. I think that there probably hasn't been enough from me for that reason, and always grateful to get the feedback that more would be welcome.
Thank you very much. And just one last question. Any parting thoughts or opinions you'd like to share? Where can students get in touch with you? Who can they go talk to about these kind of things and to get support?
Sure. I mean, I think there's several. So one, I'm colm.harmon@ed.ac.uk. Many students email me every day about things. It's one of the joys of the job, and I don't say that to make it sound frilly or fancy. It really is why I do this job. Lucy is Lucy Evans at ed.ac.uk as deputy secretary. Many of the things that we do, she drives. Both of us are more than happy, to be contacted directly. I think we want to try and make sure that we try and use the web and other forms of communications more effectively. So if you're not looking at those parts of the website, they are actually updated very frequently. They're not as glossy sometimes as I think they might be, but that's a design question more than anything else. I think there's a lot of information around cost of living funds, accessing it, and so on, that is there. Look at those sources. But critically is when things are going wrong, or if things are starting to look like they're going wrong, tell us. We need to know. It sounds very kind of cheesy, but we're sort of in this together about these things. Our job is to try and make it as right as possible. We can't solve all the problems, and I think it's my job to be as honest when I can't solve something as much as when I can. But I would say, look at that website. It does change frequently. Talk, email me or email Lucy if easier. We get it all the time, and we welcome it. And that's actually true, I think, for the senior team more broadly. The number of emails the principal gets, which he answers, is significant. But it's better for us to start to get things when they're emerging, and we also love getting ideas. As I said, if someone has something says, well, if this was in place, this would help. We then can go, you're right, that might help. Let's see, can we experiment with something? So reach out to me, reach out to Lucy, check the web, watch the social media, all the kind of obvious things. But let us know when things are going wrong, and let us know your ideas about how things could be better.
Well, Professor Harmon, thank you so much for joining me. And I've been Susu for EU TV.